Hi, Brian.
Hi, Anand.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing very well.
Oh,
Beautiful
that's
day in Ann Arbor.
that's great. It's so nice to have you here.
I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. So today my guest is Brian Denton. He's the Stephen M. Pollock Professor of Industrial and Operations Engineering at the University of Michigan. His research interests are data-driven decision-making and optimization under uncertainty, with applications to healthcare delivery, semiconductor supply chain management, and other industrial systems. He has a cross appointment in the School of Medicine. He's a member of the Cancer Center and the Institute of Healthcare Policy and Innovation at the University of Michigan. His honors and awards include the NSF Career Award, the Wagner Prize by Informs, the IISE Outstanding Publication Award, and the Canadian OR Society Best Paper Award. He has served on the editorial boards of Health Systems, IISE Transactions, Interfaces, Manufacturing and Service Operations Management, Medical Decision Making, Operations Research, Optimization in Engineering, and Production and Operations Management. He served as the founding Medical Decision Making Department editor for IISE Transactions on Healthcare Systems Engineering from 2008 to 2015. He has co-authored over 100 journal articles, conference proceedings, book chapters, and patents. He's an elected fellow of Informs and IISE, past chair of the Informs Healthcare Applications Section, secretary of Informs, and president of Informs. He currently serves as chair-elect of the Council of Industrial Engineering Academic Department Heads. Brian, such an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm really honored to be here. I've seen some of the guests that you've had on, and so it's a real honor to be in that group.
Yes. So, Brian, you were born in 1970 in Canada, just like my brother. But where precisely?
Yeah, I grew up in Burlington, Ontario, which is a suburb of Toronto. I grew up there. I went to high school there, and then I moved around a little bit. Went to university in Hamilton, Ontario, and spent some time in Toronto as well before moving to the U.S. later.
Ah, okay. Can you give a brief overview of your parents?
Yeah, wow. My parents they grew up in Toronto, and both my mother and father went to University of Toronto. My father, I think, for statistics undergrad, and then moved into economics. And my mother did a degree in hotel management, which was a popular major at that time. So they were very Toronto-centric people, and that figured pretty prominently in my life. Spent a lot of time in
Uh
Toronto, although we were living in the quieter suburb of Burlington, Ontario.
huh. Your mom also did charity work, right?
Yeah, she was a teacher early on, I think elementary school teacher, and she did a lot of volunteer work. She was working at a local hospital and was able to spend a good amount of time at home, which was a great thing. So I had lots of oversight and supervision and making sure that I wasn't getting into too much trouble. So that was we were very, very privileged to be able to have that situation.
That's great. So you had a very good influence from your parents.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was very lucky.
Yeah. Are you part of a larger family?
I am. Yeah. I have three siblings. I've got a sister and two brothers, all older. So I'm the youngest of four. And I think they paved the way. According to them, they paved the way to make life easy for me once I hit the scene. So it was good to have some older brothers and a sister.
Yeah. Are they scholars like you?
Yeah, well, we have a pretty academic family. So my father's an economist and a professor, and my one brother is a professor of physics. My sister is a professor of communications, and my other brother's a lawyer. There's always one black
Yeah.
sheep in the family. Just
Yeah.
kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Lawyer
Yeah.
jokes are my favorite.
Yeah, I was about to say that, but you were faster. Yeah, yeah. No offense, of course. Um, so I'm going to quote a verse from a song called "Subdivisions" by the greatest Canadian group ever. I'm talking about Rush, of course.
I know you're not
Whose
biased in
members,
any way.
whose band members also grew up in the suburbs of Toronto. Let me know if it resonates with you. All right. So it goes. Any escape might help to smooth the unattractive truth, but the suburbs have no charms to soothe the restless dreams of youth.
I love it. Yeah, I grew up liking Rush, like a lot of Canadians and a lot of Americans, and apparently Brazilians as well. And I would say that sort of rings true. The suburbs to me they're pretty quiet, but that not a bad thing. You know, there's just a lot of freedoms to do things. You know, very safe community. We're very privileged, and Toronto figured very prominently in growing up because my parents were so comfortable with it, and we could take a train very easily. So I think maybe when I was, I don't know, 11, 12, I was allowed to take the train to Toronto. Not all my friends were allowed to do that. I think my parents felt relatively comfortable with Toronto, and so going to Toronto was something I did quite a lot as a young kid, and then growing up. It was a great experience.
Nice. And so, what did you do to escape the unattractive truth?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I had lots of pastimes. Some of them, slanted towards cold weather, which we're not strangers to. So I did like sledding and lots of skiing growing up. Summers were, a lot of fishing, spending a lot of time in the outdoors. Yeah, those are some of the, the fun things that I remember.
You went fishing with your family or any particular group of people?
Yeah, I think I'm the only one in my family who likes fishing, let alone loves fishing. And it's because my uncle, actually, when I was growing up, we had a lake house that we would go to, and I would be pretty bored in the summer. We didn't have a lot of TV, video games, the things that I thought were really important back then. Of course, I've changed my mind about this substantially, but I'd get bored, and I had time on my hands, and so my uncle took me fishing. I think he took all my siblings fishing, all his kids fishing. I'm not sure that anybody liked it very much, but I loved it, and just a pastime that caught fire for me. And I have great memories of doing a lot of fishing, and I still do it now. I do a lot of fly fishing now. Maybe not a lot, but I do a couple serious trips. One to northern Canada, which is fun in the summers, and usually one to the Caribbean, lately the Bahamas, for some tropical saltwater fishing.
Wow, that's fancy. Did you have any interesting sports?
I did, yeah, lots of interest, very little skill. I would say, yeah, I can remember playing soccer, football, lots of stuff. Baseball, probably my favorite at the time. I did not play hockey, which is very unusual for Canadians. I think my parents were probably tired of the 5 or 6 a.m. practices, with my siblings, but I wasn't harmed by that at all. I didn't really like skating all that much. I was more of a skier. So
Right. So you played, you mentioned soccer and football. You played Canadian football, I suppose.
yeah, exactly.
The rules are
Yes.
slightly different than the American football.
Yeah, yeah. Instead of having 4 downs, you have 3 downs, and so it promotes more risk. I think risk taking. You can't punt every time on 3rd down, and so that's one thing about the game that I think is
Yeah.
kind of cool. Although yeah, I like NFL and I love NCAA sports in general.
hmm Yeah, I realized that when I went to Toronto myself in 1993, and I went to see a match between Toronto Argonauts against the Hamilton Tiger Cats. So I realized it was similar, but with some small differences. And when I visited Toronto, I got to know the Toronto Blue Jays, the Toronto Maple Leafs, and the Toronto Raptors were just about to start their franchise. Did you used to attend the matches of these teams?
Yeah, I've been to Raptors games. I've been to a lot of Blue Jays games. I used to go pretty regularly, and seats were pretty affordable then. I never went to any Maple Leafs games. They're way out of my price range at that time. I think they're the most expensive in the league. And oddly, hockey didn't resonate with me as much as baseball. Although now I enjoy hockey, mainly really just watching it. But yeah, the Blue Jays are something that played a really important role. And as I was growing up, they had some really good years, like 1993. I think it was, they won the World Series, and that left an imprint on me. I actually got to go to the game where Joe Carter hit a home run, I think, to win the World Series.
Wow. Yeah, I have this very random curiosity. When I came back from that trip, I had this Blue Jays poster, and I don't remember why and how I got that, but I decided just to put there on the wall, like just in front of my bed. So I had this very good recollection of that poster of the Blue Jays, although I'm not into baseball at all. But I just find it cool, and I left it there. And I had a Michael Jordan poster as well. And at that time, when I visited the Canada, I also went to the U.S. and MJ was in his prime. So that was also influential. So that's why I remember the Blue Jays very vividly.
Oh yeah, you have a lot of Canadian connections. I think you should be an honorary Canadian.
And what was your soundtrack during the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
Yeah, it changed, but it was never really that diverse. I liked classic rock in the 70s for sure. I guess in the 80s, pretty influenced by my older brothers, probably. So Rolling Stones and The Who and Jethro Tull, Led Zeppelin. And then over time, it sort of started to morph. Liked Rush, I got into more alternative music. So I replaced some of the soundtracks with Smashing Pumpkins and Pearl Jam, and lots of different 90s bands that I liked, Green Day, stuff like that. But really not all that diverse when you look at it. Trying to work on that nowadays, and I sort of have an appreciation for just about any kind of music, at least to listen to it a little bit. But
Yeah,
that's what it was, 70s, 80s, 90s for me.
very good musical taste. I think you were the first guest to have mentioned Jethro Tull. The flute is really, a trademark.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I like it also. Aqualung and all of that.
I got to see Jethro Tull, and I saw a lot of these bands in Toronto. Maybe every one that I mentioned, except for Pearl Jam.
Wow.
Yeah. Pearl Jam's hard to get tickets to, so we're gonna go. My wife and I are gonna go see Pearl Jam at the end of this summer. That's been something that has been on her list of things to want to do, and I'm excited about it too.
Yeah, it seems very exciting. Are you into Canadian artists like Bryan Adams, Alanis Morissette, Bare Naked Ladies, and so on?
Yeah, I am. There's lots of Canadian bands I like. Bare Naked Ladies would stand out in the ones that you mentioned, for sure. Tragically Hip, which was a very popular Canadian band. They never really made it big in the US, but they were, yeah, very, very popular in Canada. I got to see them a few different times over the course of my life. It was great.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, when you were growing up, video games were flourishing. Did that wave hit you?
Yeah, that wave hit me really hard. I loved video games, so I can remember getting a Atari, I don't know, 2400, or I don't remember what it was, but with all these what would be considered retro games now, like Asteroids and Space Invaders and Pitfall, and
Pac-Man.
I could keep going, Pac-Man, Vanguard. Yeah, I was obsessed with video games to some degree, and also I was really interested in computers. So I remember for work, my father he had computers for his research. He had a home office as well. There were others, but one I remember most vividly is probably the Apple IIe, and learning to do a little bit of programming with it. I think I wrote some code to show like the Earth revolving around the sun. And when I say that sounds very exciting, but it was really like a slightly bigger dot and then a small dot going around it, and just coding like equations for gravity. But that's something I really loved, learning more and more about computers. It was just the right time. I was just right age when that started to happen. I think my brothers they claim, and my sister claimed that they were using punch cards in high school. By the time I got to high school, it was Commodore 64s, which seemed like a major advance, and was at the time. But of course, this is nothing compared to what we carry in our pockets, like iPhones nowadays.
Very nice. It's also interesting to know that you have started coding at home when you were still young. Brian, to what extent do you think you have been influenced by the US when growing up?
Oh, I'd say a lot. Living very close to the border, cultures are not all that different in the grand scheme of things. I watched a lot of U.S. TV. To some degree, I like a bit of a mystery, like this other country, on the other side of this sort of imaginary line, the border. And I think, yeah, a lot of the influence was probably coming from the U.S., but also Canadian influence, and some of that is like British influence too. I didn't really realize, which things were which until I moved to the U.S. and discovered things like you can't buy Smarties, or well, you can get Smarties, but they're not like candy with chocolate in them. They're just like these sugar candies, and so these are small differences, but when you add up many of those, then you start to realize that you can separate a little bit of the culture there between the Canada and the U.S.
Yeah, you mentioned you had British influence. How come?
Yeah, a lot of relatives, lots of friends. I guess, Canadian being a Commonwealth country and
Hmm.
keeping some of the traditions. I guess that's why. And I noticed that when some of the things, again, when I moved to the U.S., I realized, oh, some of these phrases I might use or some of the foods I might get are pretty British inspired, I guess, and didn't easily find those in the U.S. So that was interesting to learn how to attribute some of the different things, whether it was food or culture or expressions that you would use. Yeah, it was good to be able to sort that out later in life.
Hmm. Were you a good student?
Yes and no. Yeah, I would say uh, I definitely had very 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 good highlights sometimes, but I was also not great at just sitting and listening. So earlier on, yeah, high variability. I probably would set records for variability and how I did in certain subjects. Math and science wouldn't be tolerated to do poorly in those in my household. It was a very scientific household, and it's true of other things too, but math and science were highly emphasized. And so by the time I got to high school, I do much better, but still ups and downs until I got later into high school and got serious about stuff and learned how to really concentrate, which I think for me was when I was younger hard to do. I just sitting and being quiet and listening, that was not my strength when I was growing up as a kid.
So full of ups and downs. It was like a roller coaster, or like trying to converge and stabilize and have this very good performance right over the years. So that could more or less reflect your trajectory
I
in
think
that regard.
that's true. Yeah, and the ups and downs, I think they were felt more by my parents, which is part of the problem because it was like I was always motivated by things, but not always motivated by the thing I was supposed to be motivated by at the time. And so, yeah, I received a lot of report cards, as we'd call them, that would say I'm not meeting my full potential, and that was not an expression that was met very happily by my parents.
Uh-huh.
If they'd said, "Well, he's doing satisfactory and the best he can," that would have been fine. But doing satisfactory and not meeting your potential, that was like not the kind of thing my parents wanted to hear. So I owe a lot to my parents in creating a structure that made sure that I did work and was successful. Might have been very different if I didn't have that kind of support system.
Yeah, that's interesting and also very nice to hear. You had your parents to save the day. What did you like to read in those days?
Yeah, when I was young, all kinds of stuff. I would say a lot of science fiction, really a lot of science fiction. Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, um, just lots of authors. I could go through a lot of books, and I like nonfiction too. I was really, really into learning about astronomy and um, astrophysics and just about anything to do with space science was incredibly exciting and interesting to me. In fact, I thought, I want to be an astronomer. That was probably my first realistic career aspiration. Before that, maybe it was, who knows? I want to be an astronaut. But Yeah, being an astronomer was something that I thought would really be in the cards for me. And then I later learned that, some of the things that you enjoy or find interesting in a popular perspective aren't always the things you really want to do when it comes down to the actual grind of the work that you have to do.
I totally get that. So you probably read like Carl Sagan, Stephen Hawking, and Feynman, and other guys like this.
Absolutely. Yeah, lots of books by them. And I read all about Einstein and any interesting scientists or mathematicians. Usually those books would be floating around my home. And so I had access to a lot of things. So I had a Scientific American subscription that went through my entire life with my family. And then my father was getting it for me and continuously had access to that, which has been great. Pretty,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
important constant.
Yeah. So your interest in learning about the cosmos motivated you to pursue a double degree in physics and chemistry?
In a way, yeah, I would say that when I was in high school, I really loved chemistry and had a great chemistry teacher. And I think his name was Mr. Smith. I have no idea what his first name would be. And I think he might have had a PhD in chemistry, but I'm not 100% sure about this. But anyways, an excellent teacher. I love chemistry. I was going to be a chemist. That was the plan. And I went to college and went through the natural science core classes and math and all that, and still like chemistry. And then when I got into my second year, there were a lot of labs, and that's when I discovered I'm actually not great at lab work. And for chemistry, that's not so great. There's a lot of lab work. So by that time I had finished, I finished my second year, but I was thinking about different options and opportunities. And I had discovered that I really love physics. Physics was perfect for me. There was a pretty healthy, theoretical physics branch, so I could safely stay away from some of the lab courses where I might have been a danger to myself or others, and solve problems. So do lots of math and scientific approach to learning how to solve problems. So the combination was great. I followed through on both of them. Probably the physics has been more impactful for me and my journey ultimately into operations research. But I think they were both, they're both very, very good experiences.
You studied at McMaster University from 89 to 94, right?
Yeah, 5 years. So that was the addition of the other major. So I did 2 years in chemistry, and then I decided I'll do the double major. I had a good advisor who said, "Well, look, you got almost most of the lab courses in chemistry, so just one or two more, and it'll be smooth sailing. You might want that chemistry degree, and we can add on the physics degree, but." It did cost an extra year, although I don't really regret that at all. It was, I just learned a lot and was able to mature, with that extra time as well.
What are your best memories from your college years?
Oh, all kinds of stuff, I guess. I genuinely enjoyed the subject matter I was learning, aside from not being great at the in the lab. Hanging out with friends. There'd be a lot of music on campus. In Canada and at McMaster, there were pubs on campus, and these were like pretty important social hubs. And so I didn't spend a huge amount of time there, but I definitely lots of Thursday nights or maybe a Friday or a Saturday would be there with friends, and those were definitely good memories as well. So yeah.
By any chance, had you learned anything about OR optimization up to that point?
Almost nothing. Never heard of OR. Optimization, just a little bit. Kind of thing you would get in calculus class or once in a while in physics, just a little bit. But, we weren't talking about like engineered or people generated systems that you could control and design different ways. It was more like natural phenomena in the sciences. So optimization was a pretty big blind spot for me. And when I got exposed to it eventually, loved it. I just had an affinity for it and was enjoying soaking that up once I did get into operations research. Actually, I think that there is one area of overlap with operations research as I think about this more, and that was using simulation. So Monte Carlo simulation was something that was clearly an important part of some of the kinds of like computational physics classes that I took. And so it was interesting to discover that this is not just physicists or just pure sciences that are using this approach, but it's an important part of operations research and management science. And so
Yeah.
I made a lot of discoveries like that actually when I moved into OR, and realized I had a lot of things in my toolkit that were quite useful to me from my chemistry and physics background.
Mm-hmm. A couple of years later, you obtained your master's degree in physics from the York University. What was your research topic?
Yeah, well, I went to grad school to do a master's, largely because I wasn't really finding a job I wanted out of undergrad, and I guess I thought that well, physics and chemistry aren't easy, so they must be rewarded with fantastic jobs. And I learned that, well, yeah, it takes more than that. Some of my friends who are engineers were finding jobs right away, of course, so because they were getting a bit more of a practical education. But yeah, I went to York. I did a master's degree in theoretical physics, and the topic was really like broadly quantum mechanics and mostly solving systems of partial differential equations stemming from Schrodinger's equation. So my thesis was about studying basically through computational experiments, hydrogen, so the simplest of atoms, and how it reacted in very strong pulsed laser fields, which was a important topic at the time.
It sounds fascinating, actually. Was it during your master's that your interest in programming grew?
Yeah, it grew a lot. I did a lot of programming for my thesis, and I took some courses. I took a great numerical analysis course where everything we did was like we cover the theory, but also implement algorithms. And I discovered I had that was something I was pretty good at and enjoyed doing, especially when it works. So yeah, I really got into programming a lot and comfortable with that. And I transitioned from languages, for example, and just got comfortable with learning new things. Learning how to learn basically when it came to sort of being on your own on the computational aspect of things.
Right. Brian, now the question on everyone's lips. How on earth did you end up in a PhD program in management science?
Yeah, I think you can guess that I didn't grow up, as a young child imagining that I would move into the field of operations research or management science. But I was finishing my 2-year master's, which involved a thesis, and then the natural step would be to do a PhD. And so I was accepted into the PhD program and would have worked with the same advisor. I got a little nervous, though, largely because most of the jobs for theoretical physicists were of two types. One was to be a professor, which I wasn't interested in. And even if I was, it was very tough. Far more graduates than positions that were available. And I learned that from my brother, who did many postdocs and very successful. But I was a little worried about that. The majority of my friends were actually going to work at banks and financial mathematics groups. And that sounded kind of interesting to me. So I started exploring around different possibilities, and I heard about this thing called operations research that my dad, being an economist, was familiar with. And I think there was a physics professor at York University who mentioned it. And so long story short, I made a really quick change to, I hadn't actually started the PhD, so I wasn't really dropping out, but I had agreed to do it. And so fortunately I had an advisor, Marco Horbach, that was very supportive. And I made a very quick change to start a PhD program at McMaster University in the business school there. And I thought this might be the worst decision I've ever made because I really did not know very much about it. I remember finding the Fokker-Planck equation in a queuing book and seeing various things, and I thought, oh, this is very similar to theoretical physics, and there'll be lots of jobs. And I was wrong about the first point, but I was right about the second point, and it turned out to be a fantastic decision, but one that I don't know. I wouldn't know how to define the odds of that happening, but it was definitely a last minute discovery that totally changed my career.
Yes, in a way, it was a gamble. You took a shot. It was risky, but it paid off, right? And you became this great personality in our field.
I don't know about that latter part, but it definitely paid off. It was great, and in a way, I couldn't have made a better decision. You know, it just fit very well for me, and yeah, very happy with it. But it was a big gamble.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I seemed like a big gamble at the time. You know, I don't think it would have been hard to change directions. But now, you know, I'm a little more probably careful now. Back then, doing something risky like that, it seemed like a really big deal. But looking back at it, maybe it's not such a big deal. So it all takes perspective to, you know, try to figure out where these things stand in terms of risk versus reward trade-off.
Yes.
So now I get to talk to lots of students, undergraduate students, who of course are sometimes terrified of making the wrong decision about a first job that they'll take. And of course, as we know, you know, you're going to have a dozen careers over your life probably. So it's something where failure is almost as useful as successes early on in your career, I think.
Yes, I can relate to this quite a lot. It's a lot of pros and cons. You have to, you know, do right assessment to make a promising decision. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but you have to keep trying. You have to be a bit ambitious at times, and taking chances is just part of the game.
I
That's why
totally
I
agree.
can understand exactly what you're saying. But in the end, how was the transition between fields?
It was relatively smooth. It was a very busy time because it was a management science degree in a business school. Things were set up so you had to have introductory everything in business, and that wasn't the most attractive part to me. Probably because I was being pushed out of my comfort zone. So I took courses in marketing, finance, economics, organizational behavior, accounting. Not my favorite. Uh, and, but you know, I've now realized that actually that was great background that we all probably could benefit from a little bit of. And so I had a lot of courses. I was really like learning a lot of things, which was exciting, but also I think I was taking maybe 6 courses at once um, to try to get some of these kind of required courses out of the way so I could concentrate on optimization and queuing and supply chain management and different kinds of classes. So it was, I guess, a little bit tough, but really enjoyable. I just, you know, I found that like a lot of my friends were more challenged by the math part and the computing part, and they really knew the applications. I didn't know much about the applications, but I found I could soak that up, and I was really like enthusiastic about learning about all these new things. And the math part at times certainly challenging, but my preparation I found was quite good coming out of physics. So I think we all had something to learn, and for me, a lot of it was the applications, which I really enjoyed.
Right. After being exposed to various topics, what did you finally study during your PhD?
Yeah, well, I was 100% sure I knew I wanted to study queuing, and went to work with Diwakar Gupta, who was at McMaster at the time, and thought of as a queuing person. This is largely because I saw the Fokker-Planck equation in a book. So I was acting on incredibly sparse information. And then as soon as I took an optimization course, just linear programming, that really clicked for me. I really enjoyed that. And so I got much more interested in optimization. And I remember going to my first Informs conference, which I think was in Montreal, if I'm remembering correctly. And John Burge and Francois Louveau gave a tutorial on stochastic programming. And their book had just come out, and I was just completely sold. I found that fascinating, and I was very lucky because Diwakar, as my advisor, was very open to learning new topic areas, and so he was very supportive of that. And so I ended up focusing mainly on like stochastic programming and applications to scheduling problems. and some supply chain management, inventory control kinds of problems.
During your PhD, did you have the chance to collaborate with companies?
I did, yeah, and I think it wasn't as common maybe then as it is now. I remember when I started doing that, one of the more senior PhD students said, "Oh, this would be really good because real applications are getting very popular now." And I thought, what a strange thing. Real real applications. What is a not real application? I was just found that to be such a curious thing to say. And I think what we were seeing a lot in journals was problems that were, sometimes based on real data, sometimes based on conversations with experts in industry, but also sometimes made up problems that really, weren't suited to any application in industry. And so I got very lucky. I had the opportunity to work with a steel manufacturer. So it's a long story, but there was a R&D group at this steel manufacturing organization, which was, close to the university. And I think they invited Steve Graves from MIT to come and visit and give them some advice on who better to do that, on how they run their internal supply chain, basically. And Diwakar and I got to come along. I think director of R&D invited us to come, and it was fascinating walking around, seeing all these, things like casting of actual metal and rolling, steel rolling, and all this stuff. And at the end of the day, I think Steve Graves gave some advice, and this is how I recall it. And one of the things he said was, maybe you should form like a academic industry partnership, and you seem to have a good opportunity right here, with Rocker and I in the audience. And I think that's really what made it happen. So about half my PhD was focused really on like industry-inspired applications in steel manufacturing and related scheduling areas.
Right. You also studied inventory management problems from a stochastic perspective, correct?
I did, yeah. And it was this really wasn't part of the dissertation, but things went very well in the research project, and so I developed a software application for optimizing choices about what kind of steel slabs. Picture these gigantic, massive steel slabs, all of different kinds of steel with different properties. And the software was used to decide what to inventory. And so I remember we were able to substantially reduce the amount of inventory by choosing different designs that could later, be used in multiple ways. So we were basically creating more flexible inventory. And I'll never forget like going out into the yard this massive yard where they had these enormous steel slabs, and seeing like some of the new inventory piles that they started to produce. And it was incredibly exciting and also somewhat nerve-wracking, because I hope I didn't have a bug in the code or something like that. But yeah, last I heard, this was at least 5 years ago, they were still using the software, and maybe it's still in use today. It was a great experience, and it was really that part of it was a team experience, and I learned a lot from people that knew how to implement things. I did not, know anything about how to work in a large organization or implement new software, but I was in very good hands. Keith Javahar was the person that I recall that was our main collaborator, and great guy. I learned a lot from. He was in the R&D organization at Tafasco, the company that we were working with.
Yeah, that sounds very impressive, and you should be really proud because your solution is, at least until recently, it was still being used. So
yeah, for all I know, it's still being used now. I think once you get into something into use, it could be just as hard to get it out of use if you wanted to. So, that's one thing I discovered is it takes a lot of work to get people comfortable with the solutions that are being generated, and things like the notion that optimal is not really optimal. Optimal is something we talk about with models, but when it comes to the real world, I mean, precision of 10 to the negative 6, not very important when it comes to that sort of thing. So that was a really great experience that kind of augmented the academic learning that I did during my PhD.
Yes. This topic on the quest for finding the optimal solution when addressing real world problems can be a bit controversial. We can even talk about that later.
Sure.
Yeah. So Brian, you got married in 2000 and you finished your PhD in 2001. Did you have any plans to stay in academia?
I did not. No, I was very interested in working in like an industry R&D environment. I think a lot of that stemmed from the experience during my PhD in steel manufacturing. And a lot of my friends were saying, "Are you sure you want to do that? Because you seem like you know you might be a more of a professor type." Having never really had a real job, of course, but I followed through on that and interviewed actually at the Informs conference, maybe in 2000, something like that. I think I went to the doctoral colloquium and interviewed a bunch of places. I had an offer at this steel manufacturing company, which I was very seriously considering. That would have been the easy thing to do and very fun. But I had other offers too. And one of them was at IBM, and the area was semiconductor manufacturing. And that was really exciting to me. So that's the direction I ended up going.
So you went to IBM, you moved to the US, you went from one Burlington to another Burlington in Vermont.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, and many people who got straight into industry after finishing their PhD tend to lose interest in their pending papers, which I find it somehow disrespectful not only to the program but also to the advisor and co-authors. How did you handle this in your case?
Yeah, I was just really driven to get those things published. I don't know exactly what was driving it, but so I would work in the evenings or on weekends. You know, it wasn't part of my job at IBM. I was in a part of IBM that was R&D with a pretty big D element, development of, tools and software that could be used for supply chain optimization. And so I had to do a lot of this in my free time, and I could have easily, so I'm not going to try to do this second or third revision of this paper. I think my wife thought I was not thinking straight to be spending all this time on this when it wasn't really helping me with my current job. But I just really wanted to do it. And then I realized later that, wow, it's good that I did, because clearly I went on to an academic position, and having, published some of my thesis was I think very important to show some potential for research. And it all worked out, but it definitely had a lot of late nights trying to respond to reviewer 3 or whoever it was about some questions they still had on the third, version of the paper we sent them.
Yeah, it's good that you did that. Sometimes the person just feels a bit overwhelmed, or they just lose interest, and they keep the work unfinished even after submitting the paper, and I don't think that's fair. You see, at least that's my opinion.
Yeah, it's sad too when it doesn't see the light of day, really.
Yeah.
So, I think I tell all the students that I work with, be sure you publish your thesis. It's important, you just spend a lot of time on it. Why not let it see the light of day, and who knows what might happen.
Mm-hmm. What kind of projects did you work on at IBM?
All sorts of stuff. Yeah, it was a great experience. Mostly like initially supply chain optimization for semiconductor manufacturing. So very long supply chains, extremely capital intensive. And I just loved it. I'd walk around. I worked actually in a fab. It was an installation that might have had, I don't know, 10 to 15,000 people working at it in Burlington, Vermont. I think at one point it was the largest fab in the world, or certainly in the US. And that was really enjoyable, but then it blossomed into other things. We started working with hard drive, like data storage division of IBM. All of this was back when IBM was making a lot of physical assets and doing a lot of manufacturing kinds of stuff. But over time, they've divested themselves of those things and have largely focused on the design and on running like a virtual supply chain with vendors doing a lot of the different kinds of work. But back then, I was mainly developing supply chain optimization software solutions, sometimes working on some specific scheduling problems. There's a new fully automated facility in Fishkill, New York, that I made a lot of trips to for a period of time to work on some, really interesting scheduling problems. And then eventually we commercialized the software, and that broadened the sort of exposure to industries and to other companies that were out there.
You also had the chance to work with great people there. For example, John Forrest, and you even won the Wagner Prize in 2005, your team, right?
Yeah, it was an amazing group. John Milne was probably the most influential person. He was my mentor um, in both a real and official capacity at IBM. Everybody was expected to have a mentor, and he was great. He kept me out of trouble and taught me a lot of things. And then John Forrest, who was at IBM Research, I talked and worked with him a lot on the optimization side of things. But lots of people that were there, like Bob Orzel was another person, extremely smart guy. I learned lots from him. From these senior people, it was most of the people were, I would say, older than me, and that turned out to be really great because they had a lot of experience and were willing to, mentor me, and so that was really great. Peter Lyon was our manager, who I learned a lot from him as well, and then a lot of people I'm not even mentioning. So it was a really great experience for me.
Why did you leave IBM in 2005?
Yeah, so I think around that time, a little bit before, I was starting to feel like I wanted to do something new. I was just getting a bit of an itch, and was not far off of 5 years, and could have easily stayed with IBM, but I really wanted to do something new. I applied for a few positions, and one of them was this curious position at Mayo Clinic. They had a full-page ad, as I recall, in ORMS Today, hard copy ad. So I would look at these ads, and I thought, oh, well, that would be kind of neat. I really didn't know much about healthcare at all, but I applied. It's no harm in doing it. So I literally printed my CV and sent stuff, hard copy mail. This is hilarious. And I was shocked when they called me. There was a message on my answering machine at home. My wife said, somebody from Mayo Clinic called. What's going on? And one thing led to another. They invited me for an interview. I thought maybe they made a mistake. They just pulled the wrong CV from the pile or something. And I was honest with them. I told them I really don't know much about healthcare. And I interviewed there for 2 days, very thorough. And I literally asked that question of the most senior people at the end. I said, I don't really know very much about healthcare, and I'm probably shooting myself in the foot, but I don't want to take a job that I can't be successful at. And I'll never forget, one of the people said, well, we know the healthcare side of things. What we need is operations research. And so they were looking for someone to start an initiative there. And I was the person who was lucky enough to be able to do that. And that was really a transformative experience for me, moving to a whole other industry. And I still work in healthcare related problems now.
You learn about a lot of things there, right? Grant writing and also collaborating with people at universities and things like that. So could you comment about these different experiences that you have started to develop in those days?
Yeah, it was a more open culture, more like an academic culture. So you were expected to publish. I actually had an academic position there, so it's an educational institution. They have a med school, and so I was an assistant professor, which I thought was pretty cool at the time, and never thought that would happen. I also had a title of senior associate consultant. Consultant is what they would refer to as all of their staff. Not exactly a tenure system, but very close. And to that. So it was a blend of practice and research, and it was a really great experience for me. There were so many interesting problems to work on there. So I got involved in, modeling of prediction of workforce availability, mainly like appointment slots for different specialty practices. So trying to forecast the supply that was available for patients that would be coming in on short notice. More than half of them would be, flying or coming from more than 500 miles away. And so it was very important that they be able to, get what they needed. That's why they come to Mayo Clinic, because they have a very complicated problem that their local health system couldn't diagnose or come up with a solution. And so they go to Mayo Clinic where they have specialists in everything. It's a fully integrated medical system, extraordinary quality of care. And so, so I got into the supply forecasting aspect of things, and then I got into doing a lot of surgery planning and scheduling, and other things too related to, often related to like high cost, high value resources. And anytime you found those, you'd usually find some interesting optimization problem involving some kind of resource allocation. So, so operations kinds of stuff, that was great. And I also got into doing some work in medical decision making and thinking about treatment of diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease. I started working on problems related to prostate cancer, way outside my area of expertise. But that's when I learned that that's fine as long as you have great collaborators, and I did, and it's a very collaborative place. And so I was there only for 2 years, but it was a very impactful experience for me that really opened up my eyes to a lot of new things. So really energizing. So I didn't regret leaving IBM. I didn't leave IBM to get away from it, and I've actually been very fortunate to. I never have left a job to get away from it, but just it's always been to go to some new opportunity that I found. And so this turned out to be great at Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, definitely quite productive. You had a chance to study this fairly wide range of applications, and certainly it had enriched your background quite a lot. And I'm sure that was very important and fundamental in the years that followed. And as you said, you stayed there for a couple of years. And in 2007, you joined the North Carolina State University as faculty member. What made you change your mind about having a career in academia?
Yeah, I think it was all the exposure I was getting to, collaborating more, working with academics. A big part of it was I learned how much I enjoyed working with students, especially PhD students. They would come to do internships in the summer at Mayo Clinic. So people I was collaborating with, we'd work out a good internship, and that was really fun for me. But then they would leave at the end of the summer, of course, and go back to their institutions. And so I didn't really have that exact kind of outlet at Mayo Clinic because they didn't have a PhD program in that area or in a relevant area for me. And so that's what kind of got me excited, I guess. I really wasn't looking to make a change, but I was starting to feel this idea that, well, maybe someday I might want to explore something like that. And then I ran into this person, Steve Roberts, at the Winter Simulation Conference, which I had never gone to. It was the first time I went to it and enjoyed it very much. And I gave a talk on some of the work I was doing at Mayo Clinic, and he came up after the session and said something like, "I'm Steve Roberts. I'm from North Carolina State University, and we have a faculty position, and I think you should apply for it." I was just completely flattered. And then I didn't, because I was thinking, well, I've only been here for 2 years, and I don't know, it'd be hard to move. And then I remember he emailed me again and said, "Oh, I just looking at applications, I noticed you didn't apply. I encourage you to apply." And I thought, well, okay, what's the harm? You got to remember, this is January in Rochester, Minnesota, where the temperatures are horrifically cold. And the idea of visiting North Carolina sounded pretty good. And I thought, well, at least I could learn something about the position and academic positions. And so I went there, not feeling a lot of stress. But then I started to realize over this 2-day visit, like, and they were actually helping me understand what academic career is like and how things work. And I remember getting more and more and more excited, and to the point where when I was flying home to Rochester, Minnesota, I was worried, like, maybe, wow, I should have probably prepared better. I hope I didn't mess it up. And lucky for me, they did make me an offer, and I went there, and it was a great experience. I realized that I had very little understanding what academic positions were like, especially engineering schools. I'd never been in an engineering department, and so it can be very entrepreneurial, like incredibly flexible. I mean, of course, all the great things, virtues of an academic position. But for those, that don't know that, maybe PhD students, for example, it's worth a look for sure. And industry is great for me too. So I love both environments, I would say.
How was the experience starting to teach at NC State?
It was, yeah, a little bumpy, I would say. I was not someone who was like driven to teaching. I know people that are like, they just love it. If they're in the classroom, that's when they're feeling good or at their best. And teaching for me, I would say, is not easy. I have to spend quite a bit of time really organizing the material, getting comfortable with it, explaining it to other people. These are things I discovered for me are not easy. Now, I know people that can just walk into the classroom and on a moment's notice and deliver an amazing lecture. And I wish I was one of those people, but I have to organize things. And so it took me an iteration to get better at it, and another iteration to get even a little bit better. And over time, I got very comfortable and started to enjoy it. I liken it to jogging, which I should do more of. It's like good exercise. I don't love it exactly while I'm doing it. It takes a lot of effort, and but afterwards I feel great. And if I have a class that goes well, I just feel great. And a lot of the time, I realize now that might be the most important thing I do. Some days, because you can have a lot of impact, as you know, and on teaching students earlier in their career, it can be a really fun thing once you get good and more comfortable at it.
Yes, yes. I currently teach the freshman students, computer engineering students around here. So
Wow.
it's a very rewarding experience. You have the chance to actually have an impact, as you said, on their early career, and also try to provide a positive influence and help them making interesting decisions, where to start, looking for interesting options while still in the university, getting involved into research labs and things like that. So I understand the feeling. It can be really, really rewarding. Brian, at NC State, you study a broad range of methods such as stochastic programming, stochastic dynamic programming, Markov decision process, sequential decision making, and machine learning to solve healthcare problems in the context of hospital operations, capacity planning, and screening for disease. Oof. Could you provide more details about this stream of research?
Yeah, something that's followed me, I guess, my whole career, starting with my PhD. I'm very interested in sequential decision making, whether it's like two-stage stochastic recourse problems or stochastic dynamic programs, or more interested in like reinforcement learning, just about anything related to sequential decision making. I just am drawn to. I find it very interesting, and I guess my interest has broadened over time in that area. And all those problems were ones where, these are basically sequential decision making problems of some type and involve some uncertainty. So yeah, that's been kind of a good guiding light for a lot of my research. Certainly not the only thing that I do. Like, I mean, you mentioned machine learning, and back then I probably would have said, well, some statistical methods. And I really believe, well, whatever, if you're going to do a job, then whatever the right tool for the job is what you should use. So not trying to turn something into a stochastic dynamic program if you can deal with it in a easier way. And so simulation, aspects of statistics, I'm comfortable with lots of different kinds of approaches and use those. But when it comes to sort of things that get me excited about methodology, I'd say that's more sequential decision making type stuff.
Got it. Why did you decide to leave NC State in 2012?
Yeah, as another example of having a really a great opportunity. NC State was a fantastic place to be in. It is a first-class institution, and was great for me. So it's hard to leave. It's hard to leave a place where you feel comfortable and happy, and you really like the people. The opportunity to go to University of Michigan came up. That was something that was just hard to turn down for a lot of reasons. One being, it was it's an excellent university, engineering, but also medical school and a large medical system, and so that was a great opportunity for research for me. And I would say it was good personally too, because I'm pretty close to where I grew up and where my wife grew up, roughly in the Toronto area. So we can drive, at the time we could drive to see our parents and family, 3.5 hour drive or something like that. And so as our parents got older, it was very nice to be able to, spend more time with them, as opposed to having to get on a plane every time, to go and visit. So a lot of things made it a good fit for me, but it was hard to leave NC State, and I appreciate the opportunity I was given to go there, and sort of develop early in my career.
Yeah, I completely understand your reasons. In Michigan, you turned more attention to predictive models, machine learning, and data-driven research, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's definitely fair. I've gotten interested in predictive models as much as maybe 10 years ago, but it's been growing over time. Very interested in machine learning. I don't think I'm really the person who's going to make significant contributions to advancing like the methodology, but using it to solve problems is something I find fascinating, and it's a tool that in the toolkit that I find a lot of opportunity to use. So an example is like developing models for predicting the outcomes of diagnostic tests for patients that have cancer, for instance. I did a lot of work on prostate cancer. And so we developed models to try to predict the outcome of a MRI or a CT scan before a patient has it. So you can use it as a guideline for whether or not to recommend a patient for these kinds of imaging technologies, which have pros, of course. They're great if they detect cancer, but they also have some harms that they can cause, and they're very expensive as well. So that's one of the kind of projects where I started to get quite interested in predictive models and aspects of machine learning, and it's not slowing down now. I'm continue to be very excited about that.
Mm-hmm. You have been developing a very fruitful collaboration with the Urology department at the University of Michigan, most notably on cancer research, as you just mentioned, and that led to practical impact. Could you elaborate more on this?
Yeah, this has been one of the streams of research I'm most proud of, I guess, coming to Michigan. There's a urology department, which is outstanding. And then within that, there's a division, the Health Services Research Division. And that's an extraordinary group of researchers. And after bouncing around talking to people when I first got to Michigan, a little bit of a random walk, several people were pointing me towards this group, saying, "Oh, I should really talk to them." And I did, and I was very lucky because they were so open to research collaboration. And I started collaborating with a number of the faculty members there. And one of the projects that you mentioned, one that I'm really excited about, was with an organization called MUSIC. And MUSIC's an acronym. It stands for Michigan Urological Surgery Improvement Collaborative. So they're not just good at urology, they're good at coming up with amazing acronyms too. Anyways, this is a statewide initiative. Almost all urologists in the state participate. Data is collected for all men who get diagnosis of prostate cancer. And it's not just collected. I mean, it's very thorough, very clean. Quality checks, audits are done regularly. And I was fortunate to get in on the ground floor of some projects that were just getting started. And so one of them was related to imaging that I mentioned earlier, and models for trying to decide, who to recommend for imaging and who not to recommend for imaging on the basis of, health outcomes. And those, we were able to implement. I think that, it's fair to say that the technical problems were probably the easiest part of that project. Not easy. I mean, it was quite enjoyable to work on, but the easiest, the implementation and getting urologists to adopt these tools. That's something that this MUSIC collaboration and some collaborators like David Miller, who's now the president of our hospital system, and Jim Monty, who's a very highly respected urologist in the field, were the ones who really made it happen. And then there's many other people I'm not mentioning, but so it was genuinely very collaborative, and it was very nice to see it get implemented. And then we were able to evaluate and measure the outcomes a year later, and saw that ultimately, it's a long story, and there's an operations research paper on it, 2020, 2021, I think, that covers a lot of this project. But it's something that, went on to have some impact, and we were able to evaluate it a year afterwards to see that imaging rates, like the amount of imaging, went down substantially without changing the detection rate. So what that tells you is you're removing a lot of additional imaging tests like MRIs and CT scans and bone scans, that sort of thing, without harming the purpose of detecting cancer. And so that's improved quality of care substantially. It also reduced costs. That wasn't the motivating factor, but it's of course, these are expensive resources and nobody wants to waste them. So that's a project that really has a place in my heart as one that was great to work on, and some amazing PhD students that were working on this. Celine Murdan was one person who was a PhD student who this was a large part of her dissertation, I think. Christine Barnett was another student that did a lot of work on this, and there's been many students. I shouldn't have mentioned anybody, because now I risk not mentioning everybody, but they're on the papers and they know who they are, and it's just great collaboration. Medical doctors, biostatisticians, industrial and operations engineering PhD students, and health services researchers, and many more. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating interdisciplinary work, and I'm sure the results of this project was literally music to your ears.
I have a love-hate relationship with puns. Mostly hate, but I'm just putting that in for my friend Mark Daskin, who loves puns, and we're always going back and forth.
Yeah.
So if he listens to this podcast, he'll be all over that.
Yeah. And sorry to annoy you with this, but
No, it's just I'm mostly joking. It's fun to have this back and forth banter. Although I think your pun is very appropriate, Mark Daskin, sir, bordering on the I don't know, toxic.
Yeah, that's very kind of you. So Brian, from your publication record, one can observe papers that have appeared in medical journals. I would like you to comment on the main differences with respect to OR journals, from writing style to editorial policy and so on.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So they're very different. Structurally, they're very different. I mean, medical papers, I guess if I start like the purpose of it, I mean, they want answers to questions, right? An important question, well answered, is what they're looking for. And the answer really matters. On the other hand, a lot of operations research papers may be advancing methodology and using some test problems to see, how well that methodology works. And that's obviously extremely important endeavor. And often it's not really the results from the paper, but it's showing that this could be used to solve these kinds of problems. So on the OR side, things are very technical. On the medical side, there's aspects that can be very technical. I'd say usually the methods section, one of these papers is, for most readers, the least important. For clinical, readers, they want to figure out, okay, what's the problem? What's the answer? Do I believe it or not? And so the answer is really, the results really, really matter. If you mess up the results on a test problem when you're doing some evaluation of different algorithms, that's not such a big deal. But if you come out and say, well, this biomarker has this kind of performance, and it should be recommended for early detection of cancer, I'd say the stakes are pretty high, and so you have to spend a lot of time thinking about how to validate your work. It's so they're very different. And I actually, in story that I have, is I submitted a paper to the journal Medical Decision Making, which is more on the technical side of medical journals, and they publish lots of papers with operations researchers who are involved or even leading the project. And I submitted a paper there, and the editor-in-chief desk rejected it at the time. And what he said was, this is reads more like an operations research paper. So somehow he knew what operations research was, and spotted right away that I don't know how to write a paper. And he was right. And actually, he gave me a little bit of guidance, and I wish I could remember his name to attribute to him, but he gave me some guidance, and he was the editor-in-chief in 2006 for medical decision making. So anyways, he spent a little bit of time pointing me in the right direction, giving me a little advice on the writing. And so I revised it completely, resubmitted it, and it came back with a major revision. And I still had a lot to do on the writing and trying to put it in a form that was quite, appropriate for that journal. So I was lucky to have that experience because I got to learn, from fairly forgiving in terms of like being willing to give some advice and let you resubmit an article. And over time, and the more I work with medical collaborators, the more I've learned about how to write, very focused, tight, concise articles. It's been, experience I really enjoy.
Right. Brian, some of our colleagues have expressed their dissatisfaction towards the use of academic measures like H-index and impact factor. What's your take on these metrics?
Yeah, that's a great question. We tend to measure the things we can, and so those aren't always the things we wish we could measure. I do think there's a place for those citation counts, H-index, but I think it's very important to look at them within a field and within the context of the individual. So if let's say you're looking at someone's citation count, and because you're thinking of interviewing them for a job, well, you really have to think about how long have they been at it. If you compare somebody 10 years out to somebody who's just coming out of a PhD, that second person hasn't had the opportunity to realize their potential yet. So calibrating things, I think, is really important. And then when you look at different fields, I mean, our field is small, I would say, low citation counts, low impact factors for journals. Low, I mean, compared to other fields, other journals, New England Journal of Medicine, Journal of the American Medical Association. I mean, these have astronomically high impact factors, and they're serving very, very large communities. So I don't think that you can say, well, that research is better. Maybe it benefits more people, but I think that nothing makes sense about looking at any of those measures unless you think about the context, the field, the individual. And then after that, of course, it's certainly not a perfect measure by any means, but it's something, and I think it's worthwhile to look at and ask yourself, is my work reaching an audience? Are they paying attention to it? To me, that's a bit of useful feedback, but I also don't get obsessed about it. Or
Yes.
depressed when I look at one of my medical collaborators who has 70,000 citations or something like that, and is younger than me.
Yeah, there's also the way you were cited. You can be cited because you did the work on the, let's say, trending topic. There's this line where you cite a bunch of papers indirectly, and then your paper just gets it there, as opposed to being cited for your ideas and someone applying the methodology you've developed and things like that. So this is a bit tricky to assess and measure, but ultimately I think this is more impactful than being just cited just because you have published the last few years in that journal, and you know what I mean, right? They kind of push you towards to
totally agree.
Do all that. So I think
yeah, and I mean I don't find this with informed journals, but I do encounter it sometimes where editors will say, well, please, here's several papers that we think you should cite that happen to be in this journal, and we know the game that they're playing there, and it's not unreasonable if they suggest it, and sometimes I do reference those papers if they're really relevant, and those are points well taken, and sometimes I don't, because I don't think you should be padding papers with a bunch of references, including your own, of course, self-citations.
Yeah, self-citations, I think,
unless it's appropriate.
Yeah, as I was discussing with Eduardo Shoa, he was my PhD co-advisor and he was a subject to guest, and together we believe that at least if you're going to use the H index without self-citations, probably makes much more sense, right?
Yeah.
And that's not really hard to find. You can get it on Scopus, for example. I'm not sure how far is this is easy to get using Google Scholar, but I think the community maybe should reflect on this and at least give this little adjustment. It's a very quite straightforward thing to do. Just take off the citations to your own papers and see what happens. And there are some cases that the number can drop dramatically depending on how some researchers conduct their, citation policy.
How enthusiastic they are about their own research.
Absolutely.
Which we all are. We all are, of course. Yeah, another thing I would add to this is that this is not like a universal measure of impact when it comes to research. I mean, in industry, like when I was at IBM, for example, first 5 years of my career, very hard to publish. That's not true for all parts of IBM, but for some, confidentiality is the most important thing. We were able to patent, of course, and so that was a nice outlet, but I was only able to publish one paper in my time. That was when I finished up at IBM, and that was that Daniel Wagner Prize paper that we were able to get approval to put out there. And so, patents often, they will get picked up a little bit on Google Scholar, but they don't contribute a lot in the way of citations, but they could be having tremendous impact, if they're being licensed. And so it would be easy to put too much stock, I think, in citation counts, H index or otherwise, without realizing that there's just some incredible things that are obviously happening and that we see as technology and coming out, from our field and other fields.
Yeah, one of my concerns is because you see the youngsters, they're likely to care a lot about, the number of likes, number of impressions, and then number of citations. It seems that their mindset is quite adjusted to identify those patterns and feel that this is the way to go, rather than, seeing things in a more, let's say, careful way. And it can affect the way the next generation of researchers conduct their activities and how they make decisions regarding their research work, sometimes not following what they think it's actually interesting and just going and try to accommodate their work to follow the trend and to get grants. So, with this endless sea of papers and increasing number of journals and so on, there's a lot of noise, and it's been quite a challenge to identify good work at the end of the day. And with this all, with H index, impact factor, and all of that, maybe we are not going into the most promising direction if you think about opening room for real scholars, right? So I think it's a very complicated topic. I have no easy answer to the questions that I made you. But
they're very, very good questions, and I think that these are things that we have to be thinking about all the time. I mean, a lot of places, I think, including University of Michigan, we would say, well, we're looking for impact from our faculty, and very broadly defined. So we don't say we're looking for lots of citations, because there's a lot of different ways you could have impact, but documenting it and figuring out how you can show that is, it's certainly worth thinking about, especially for the earlier career folks, because at some point, you're applying for a job, or you're, applying for a promotion, whether it's academic or in industry, and people start to ask questions like, what is your piece? What did you contribute? And I never feel very comfortable with that. I always feel like everything I do involves a team and a group of people. But there are points in your career where you have, as you know, Anand, that you have to look out for yourself and try to document, some of the impact that you've had. So yeah. I got some advice from, I think, Mark Daskin, maybe 10 years ago, to write an impact statement for your career. And I think it's a great thing to do, and then revisit every few years. It's one of those things where the process of writing it is probably more important than the actual outcome of it. But it's spending a couple hours every couple of years, I think, is time well spent to create maybe a one-page description of the impact you've had. And I have one up on my website, and I hope I'll be able to revise it many times and have more impact. And as a earlier career person, if anyone's listening, don't be scared away by the impact statements that much more senior people have in the field. So if I look at some of the extraordinary heroes of OR, if I look at their impact statement, I could easily fall into the trap of saying, wow, like I just not even coming close. But you have to remember that they've had more time, and should be excited and probably measure to some degree how you're doing relative to yourself, as opposed to a measuring stick that's relative to others.
Yeah, that's actually a very good exercise to write this one page text and try to reflect on what you have actually done and what contributions you've made. Come up with a concise document yet informative. I think it's a very nice piece of recommendation for sure, Brian. Brian, do you believe that simplicity is often overlooked by OR reviewers when it comes to methodological contributions?
Yeah, great question. I don't know if I would say overlooked, because, well, sometimes I think that it'll even come through in the reviews. They find something to be easy to understand and conflate that with the idea that maybe it's not important, right? So, yeah, I always feel that, and it's something I learned, I think, going through physics, like the simplest answer is always the best one. But I do think that there's a premium put on articles that are, complicated. If it's necessarily complicated and there's impact and it's novel, that's great. And I'm always in awe of some of the things that people are able to prove. But if you're overcomplicating it or proving theorems that really have no genuine impact, but are producing multiple pages of proofs, of course, good for those people being able to solve that puzzle. But I don't really see that as being a very important contribution. So I definitely do think there is a bias that we see towards more complex things. And this is something that not just my opinion, but I've heard this from a few people when I was president of Informs, some of these kinds of frustrations. And of course, that's going to be true for, any outlet, any journals out there. So I'm not picking on Informs by any means, but I always try to live by the idea that the simplest solution is the best one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see
Even
your
though
point.
it might hurt you with your publishing.
Yeah. And do you also think practical work is generally underrated by our journals?
Yeah, it's there's a lot of OR journals, so I think it really depends which one's talking about. Journal of Applied Analytics, I think, put a very high priority on it, but that's probably somewhat of a minority view, maybe among all the journals. In some ways, I think, and this is just based on my limited experiences, and I think this is a great topic. You could have a whole podcast on this.
Yeah.
And I could think of some people that I'd love to hear from on that. But it's more like, I would say it's like the practical impact sometimes come through as if it's more like icing on the cake as opposed to the actual cake itself. So you develop some new algorithms for some problems, and you came up with some plausible data to create some test cases. That could make for a good paper, and there's certainly many of those papers in our field's journals. If you're able to show it can be applied in practice and it really has an impact, this is to me like the gold standard. And I'm worried that we don't really put enough emphasis on that. And I'm certainly not saying all journals. Some journals are going to be very methodological, theoretically focused. That's certainly very important. But having the sort of incentive to do work that can be innovative, new, and have demonstrated impact, I think that should, in my opinion, be very, very highly regarded, and certainly in engineering. And maybe that might be in a minority opinion, I'm not sure, but I know that there's mixed views on it, and I don't claim to have the only one that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a hard question, I admit. Uh, but I see that at times you come up with a nice solution. You can demonstrate that the solution has been deployed in practice, but then you get the comment by the reviewer saying that the methodological contribution is not sound, or it's hard to assess the quality of the solution approach because you cannot compare with anyone. So this running theme keeps on going, and it discourages people to showcase very nice applications that can lead to, saving hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions of dollars at times. But because it's maybe just a mathematical formulation or a greedy algorithm, and so at times you come with a simple methodological contribution to solve a very relevant problem, and then you can see how OR can play a super practical role, and that can attract people from other fields and can give a boost to the area itself, right? It's like protecting our field in a way.
I totally agree, and it's as you were saying that, one thing that occurred to me is it's challenging. It takes a lot of effort to do this, and to implement something in practice. And I think if someone spends their entire life in academia and doesn't make an effort to get out into the real world to some degree, as a professor, for example, but working with industry organizations, it's very easy to underestimate how complicated it is to implement ideas and affect real change. And some of the work that I've done and what I've published in Interfaces now, Journal of Applied Analytics, are some of my favorite projects because they really have had some impact. But that's not a instant gratification, of course, because it takes a lot of effort. And so, if you think about a faculty member who's an assistant professor who's working towards hopefully being successful, getting promoted and tenured, you have to make some trade-offs there. It's that additional work that's required to implement something. That's going to have an impact on the rest of what you do, maybe on the number of publications or how much you have that's more methodologically or theoretically focused. So it's a difficult problem. Yeah.
Brian, let's finally talk about your extensive involvement with Informs. You became president of the Institute relatively young, correct?
Yeah, I like to think so. Yeah. I did a lot of service, and it was like more than a two-way street, that service. People say service is its own reward, and it was incredibly rewarding, and I can attribute Informs to most of the jobs I ended up eventually getting, to the network that I have. That's also a group of people that's a lot of fun to work with.
And could you pinpoint your main contributions as Informs president?
Yeah, it's always hard to identify exactly what those things are, but in my case, I served as secretary of the Informs board of directors for 4 years, and then ran for president. So I had a good understanding of how things worked at the board level, different aspects of Informs. That was a really great experience for me to have before becoming president. And so there were a number of things that I thought were important, but I also knew other people thought were important because I had been immersed in Informs for a long time and on the board for several years before becoming president. So during that time, we started a new DEI initiative, created a standing DEI committee and policies and procedures around the operations, just getting things started. And that's something I thought was important to do. And many people were involved, and many people have, built significantly on that. So, which I'm very happy to see. It was also a time where it was an enviable position to be in because financially Informs was doing extremely well. Most revenues come from meetings and from publications. And there's a reserve fund that exists to protect the organization if there's a big downturn. And our reserve just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I was part of implementing new process for members being able to put in proposals for strategic initiatives. And I don't claim that it was my idea. There were prior presidents, Terry Harrison, maybe Ann Robinson, and certainly others who, were a big part of getting it started. And as president, was refining some of the policies around this, and we got some great proposals, and we're able to fund a lot of them. Like this, we see a lot of advocacy for informs now, and things happening. And that was maybe the largest proposal that was funded by informs at the time. That was just towards the end of my time as president, and we see all kinds of things happening now. There's a lot to be excited about. Of course, the reserve fund became very important, right, with the pandemic and meetings being pretty much shut off. And so fortunately, I'm very happy that we didn't spend all the money, because it was necessary to get Informs through a really tough time. But Informs is in great shape, very resilient organization. Elena Gersman is the director, or I think of her as the CEO of Informs, and doing a phenomenal job taking over from Melissa Moore, who is the person I work with, and she did a fantastic job too. And I can't say enough about the experience and all the board, members that I got to work with during that time.
Nice. Brian, every year, a highly accomplished scholar like you should receive many applications by students from all over the place. How do you select your graduate students?
Well, thank you for the compliment. That's very kind of you. So all of our applications kind of go into a central, initially to a central admissions committee that evaluates the applications holistically. So looking at every aspect of the application, not just grades, obviously, and considers a lot of different factors, and then recommends a group that's much larger than the group that we would be able to fully recruit. And that's where people not on the committee start to invest a lot of time looking at those applications carefully. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and I always tell junior faculty, like, there's places to cut corners sometimes to save time, but this is not one of them. You want to really, really do your homework. I think it's important to talk to students as well. And so at the end of the day, I don't know, I had amazing PhD students, so maybe I'm got some skill at predicting potential. I really don't know what that skill is. If I did, I would just tell other people, or if other people have that skill, I'd want to know what it is. But spotting people that will be really successful, which has as much to do with drive as it does, with raw intelligence and creativity, I would put in there too. So those are things that I watch for, signs of those things. And I've been very, very fortunate. So we try to look at it from the perspective of, at Michigan, of trying to be as unbiased as we possibly can in evaluating applicants. And at the end of the day, there's a very small number that we can actually admit into our program. And that's true of all programs. So if there's anybody who's thinking about grad school listening to this, my advice is always apply very broadly, and do your homework and try to get as many opportunities as you can, and then do what's best for you. And I tell that to students that I work with, like undergrads or master's students, that I would love for them to stay at Michigan. I would love for them to continue working with me, but the easy thing is not always the best thing to do. And so going somewhere else, they could broaden their horizons. And so I try to always keep that in mind.
Okay. You're on sabbatical now, right?
I am, yes. It's my first sabbatical. I see why it's so popular. Very good experience. I have a 1-year sabbatical, which I'm very fortunate to have. I previously always ended up doing something new and deferring sabbatical. So now it's finally caught up, and I've got a visiting position at Oxford, and been visiting a lab as well at Harvard. And this has been a phenomenal experience for me.
Yeah. And what are your plans for the future?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to make the best of the remainder of my sabbatical, and spending a lot of time on a book on the topic of sequential decision making, very broadly defined decision analysis, MDPs, stochastic programs, simulation optimization, reinforcement learning, partially observable Markov decision processes. I'm trying to cover the spectrum, and at a level that would be workable for STEM students, probably mid to upper level undergraduate students in engineering programs are suitable for introductory graduate classes. So I'm avoiding real analysis, a lot of calculus, trying to make it as accessible as I can. And partly it's a response as having taught a lot of these courses and topics and learning over time what works. And now I'm working on putting it together and with all Python examples. So I've been learning a lot of Python over last year, which I really enjoy, and getting more into the computational aspect of things. So the future, I don't know long term what the future has in store, but I'm excited to be spending more time on research and working with students and doing all those fun things that we do.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I'm really looking forward to reading that book. So best of luck in the final preparation. I know it's a very time-consuming task, but I'm very confident that that will pay off. Brian, would you like to leave a final message for our viewers and listeners?
Oh, thank you for that. Could I leave 2 messages?
Okay.
I'll be brief. One is that I want to thank you, and for this amazing podcast. I'm not referring to this specific one. I hope this won't bring down your average ratings, but I've listened to many of them. It's a great service to our field. And if people haven't been listening to them, there's so many really, really interesting ones, and you're kind of cataloging a lot of the history of our field, I think, which is phenomenal. So thank you for making our world seem like a smaller place by being able to get to know some of the people like me that I've been in awe of, like some of these incredible people that I maybe never have met before and never have gotten to know. So that's one. And then another is, I guess, more like a call to action. One thing I've been thinking about a lot and for quite some time is how many people are out there in like STEM in general, math, statistics, but computer science, other areas of engineering that could be incredibly successful in our field as graduate students, PhD students, for example. And so I guess the call to action would be, I want to encourage, anybody who's listening to think about what you could do to help someone discover our field. For me, one of the things I did recently was had a chance to go to Swarthmore University and speak with their undergraduate students in mathematics and statistics. And, it's an eye opener for them to see some of the applications that are possible. And we had a number of people apply to our program, and some of them will be joining our program. And I figure if we all do this, do something to spread the word like this, we could really, really have a huge impact on our field from the perspective of diversity, and from the perspective of general interest and opportunities for students. So that's my my one request for anybody who feels up to it. And feel free to contact me because I have at least one experience under my belt, and happy to share it and connect you with people that also have had similar experiences. It's very gratifying to see when it works.
All right. So thank you very much for both messages. I think you were exceptionally kind in the first one, and the second one was very precious piece of recommendation. I think we should listen to that and try to convert that into positive outcome for the STEM community and especially the OR community and so on. So Brian, I cannot thank you enough for your time. This has been a wonderful conversation. I had a lot of fun. I hope you have enjoyed it as well. So thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Very enjoyable.
Yes. I wish you all the best in your book, in your future endeavors. And once again, thank you so much. So see you soon. And take care, Brian. Bye. Ciao.
Thank you, Anand. Take care.